is the story of how I bought my first motorcycle. Ever since I was young, I remember dreaming about owning my very own motorcycle. I grew up in a family where both my parents were raised riding motorcycles. My dad rode around his farm on a dirt bike, and my mom grew up riding motorcycles with her dad and her brother. She even drove her bike from Vermont all the way to Kansas in the wintertime, just to prove her boyfriend at the time, which was my father, and her friends wrong. She is probably the biggest reason I wanted to ride a bike while growing up and still continue to ride to this day. But enough reminiscing. Back to the story. The moment finally came one day in the middle of winter. It was a moment where my patience crossed paths with my greed, and they made a secret little deal. A deal that would start making my bank account sweating profusely. That was the moment I decided to buy my first motorcycle. So, I started scouring the internet for used motorcycles. Here's where all the motorcycle salespersons come in and tell me how affordable these monthly payments are. No, fuck that. Fuck buying new. If you don't know how to clean a bike, let alone ride a bike, you might as well buy a used bike. You're gonna drop it, and you might as well save some money and learn some basic maintenance along the way. It also helps to buy during the winter time. Most people aren't riding around when there's snow on the ground unless you're a little unhinged like I am. But once you decide when to buy a bike, the first thing you need to think about is what kind of bike you want to buy. Personally, I grew up skateboarding, maybe because it was cheaper than buying a motorcycle, but because of this, I was always intrigued when I saw videos of people doing wheelies, stoppies, balancing. I was enamored by the idea of stunting on a motorcycle, and because of that, I narrowed my search mainly to street bikes. Although I do see myself purchasing a supermoto in the future. Keep your eyes out for one of those videos. From my own research, I found the most popular builds for stunt bikes are generally the Ninja 636. I, however, am a Honda girl. My mom and her father before her both rode Hondas, and that's probably the biggest reason why I was dead set on getting a Honda for myself. So that cut down the massive catalog of bikes to choose from, down to two mainly. The CBR RR and the CBR F4i. I've seen multiple people stunt on both, but the vast majority of people who are stunting on Hondas are on the F4i. The F4i has the better frame for stunting and more parts available in general, which makes it a better choice, since I intend to stunt on this bike one day. However, I like the look of the RR better. So, needless to say, I decided to do a bit more work so that I can keep the more aggressive look of the bike. Now that I had targets in mind for purchasing, I took to the internet to begin my quest for my metal stallion. I first ran into an issue when searching Craigslist. Apparently, now on Craigslist, you have to pay to make a post to sell a car or a motorcycle. This has only left a few handful of choices to choose from in my area, so I had to take to the Facebook Marketplace, which is apparently the new place to buy and sell used vehicles. It gave more results while avoiding dealership level prices, so the worst, most anxiety-provoking moment of the bike buying process was about to begin. I started messaging sellers and asking about their bikes. It took a bit of searching and a lot of patience, but eventually I found two bikes that were in fairly good looking shape and also fell in my budget price range. I ended up only messaging two sellers, but if I would go back and do it again, I would definitely message more. With a few options in mind, we loaded into my partner's truck and headed out to check out the first of my options. It took us around an hour to get where we were headed, but we managed to make it before the excitement ate up the remaining energy in my reserves. Upon hopping out of the truck, the first bad omen showed its ugly face. I noticed in the window of the buyer's house he was flying a Confederate battle flag. I bit my tongue holding back the inner American from showing this second-place traitor what a real rebel fights for. That was when I saw my baby for the first time. It was a strange color for the fellow that was selling it. After pretending like I knew what I was doing whilst walking around the bike, I asked about giving it a test ride. He said it shouldn't be a problem if I had cash in hand. Unfortunately, I did not. The seller gave me a little bit of a strange vibe, and it wasn't just because of the Confederate flag he was flying in his window, but I think seeing a big bike for the first time had me a little starstruck. I looked past all my intuition and decided I was going to buy the bike. After securing a small loan, did I mention I was impatient? I set up another visit with the second place seller. When I say second place, I don't mean in reference to another seller, I mean in reference to the Constellation Confederation flag. And with much satisfaction, he hadn't sold the bike. My bike buddy and I returned to the seller, and this time we got to take the bike for a ride, and it ran great. It was just a short ride to make sure it shifted through all the gears and it didn't have any glaring performance issues. We did, however, find out that the bike wasn't insured on our drive after he told us. After my pathetic attempt at bartering, I only managed to get the bike talking down another $200. I should have pushed a little harder in retrospect, but whatever. It was a learning experience. I was finally the proud owner of my very own motorcycle. It was such an amazing moment. I was grinning ear to ear the whole truck ride home, but not nearly as much as I was when I finally turned that bike on for my first ride. If I could, just for a second, ramble about how much I love my bike. I love this bike. I know people don't always recommend buying a 600cc bike as a first bike, but I'm utterly in love. There is a ton of power packed in such a tiny little machine. Every time I get a sort of childlike glee when I turn the key, push the electronic starter, and hear the chirp before the engine purrs to life. But to get back on track, after that first ride, when the afterglow started to wear off, my newly acquired metal steed began to show its signs of abuse and neglect. And thus began the second stage in my journey to buying and fixing my first bike. I stripped the bike's fairings off piece by piece in order to clean my new toy. Upon removing the pieces, I found the first big tell of a poorly maintained bike. The bolts and other fasteners on the bike were about as non-existent as the seller's vehicle insurance. I found standard hardware on a metric bike and hidden zip ties that were holding pieces together, and cracks in the fairings that weren't visible to the eye when put together. I was prepared to fix up the bike. I was just a little taken back by how much work it was actually going to be. Luckily, even though poorly maintained, the bike didn't seem to have any glaring performance issues yet. Knock on wood. While I was still prepared for the task, it was just going to take much longer than I initially thought. I decided to work towards a clean-looking naked or Street Fighter style bike. Related question. Is a Street Fighter called a Street Fighter because they're partially naked, like the dudes and ladies in Street Fighter? I did this mainly to save on some fairing costs right up front. I'm still going to get new fairings eventually, but I like switching things up a bit. And like I said, it cuts back on parts I need to buy right away. I am going to use this bike to learn stunting in the future, but those parts are more expensive, so I'm saving off on those until I get the rest of the bike in good shape. But for now, I just want a bike that's comfortable to ride and looks good while riding. With some assorted bolts, a redone wire harness, a new light, and a fairing or two, I had successfully gotten my bike in a comfortable spot aesthetically. I really just need to get an actual cluster gauge mount for my speedometer and headlight. That was pretty much the story of how I bought my first motorcycle. I have a few things planned for my bike in the future. Right now, like I said, I just need to get a cluster gauge mount, as well as cleaning up some more wires, and mainly getting the rest of the hardware that the seller was missing. After my bike's looking good in a naked Street Fighter sort of setup, I want to buy the rest of the fairings. Beyond that, my main goal was to turn this bike into a stunt bike, which I'll probably make a video on in the future. This bike will mainly be set up for quick riding around town and messing around in parking lots. But if you want to keep up with me or my bike's progress, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. I'm an artist/maker at heart, so I plan to post more of my creations here. I also have a gaming channel that I post Let's Plays and streams when I get the time.